This is part of a sermon by Dr. Shadrach Meshach Lockridge. I chose not to name my sons that, but that is an epic name. He was a pastor of a Baptist church in San Diego from 1953 to 96 or something like that. And I like that it just focuses us on who Jesus is. This isn't about what do we do in our faith. This is just who he is. So I will pray after that. It's specifically poignant because my boys two of them are sick. Whatever, they'll get better. I'm not too worried about that. Our oldest, who's 7 and in first grade, today was his first day of Spanish language immersion school. He transitioned in the middle of a semester, so he had to leave his first grade class that he loved and went to a brand new school, and they speak 90% of the day in Spanish. So he got into the car when my wife picked him up, and he just started weeping. He's got a terrible headache, gave him some Tylenol, filled up his body with some water, and he fell asleep as soon as he got home. So pray for my son, and I pray that he would see Jesus and know that in the midst of the storms, this is his king. And that wasn't what I wanted to do.
The Bible says, my king is the king of the Jews. He's a king of Israel. He's a king of righteousness. He's the king of the ages. He's the king of heaven. He's the king of glory. He's the king of kings. And he's the Lord of lords. That's my king. I wonder, do you know him? My king is a sovereign king. No means of measure can define his limitless love. He's enduringly strong. He's entirely sincere. He's eternally steadfast. He's immortally graceful. He's imperially powerful. He's impartially merciful. Do you know him? He's the greatest phenomenon that has ever crossed the horizon of this world. He's God's Son. He's a sinner's Savior. He's the centerpiece of civilization. He's unparalleled. He's unprecedented. He is the loftiest idea in literature. He's the highest personality in philosophy. He's the fundamental doctrine of true theology. He's the only one qualified to be an all-sufficient Savior. I wonder if you know him today. He supplies strength for the weak. He's available for the tempted and the tried. He sympathizes and he saves. He strengthens and sustains. He guards and he guides. He heals the sick. He cleanses the lepers. He forgives sinners. He discharges debtors. He delivers the captives. He defends the feeble. He blesses the young. He serves the unfortunate. He regards the aged. He rewards the diligent. And he beautifies the meek. I wonder if you know him. He's the key to knowledge. He's the wellspring of wisdom. He's the doorway of deliverance. He's the pathway of peace. He's the roadway of righteousness. He's the highway of holiness. He's the gateway of glory. Do you know him? Well, his life is matchless. His goodness is limitless. His mercy is everlasting. His love never changes. His word is enough. His grace is sufficient. His reign is righteous. And his yoke is easy. And his burden is light. I wish I could describe him to you. He's indescribable. He's incomprehensible. He's invincible. He's irresistible. Well, you can't get him out of your mind. You can't get him off of your hand. You can't outlive him, and you can't live without him. Well, the Pharisees couldn't stand him, but they found out they couldn't stop him. Pilate couldn't find any fault in him. Herod couldn't kill him. Death couldn't handle him, and the grave couldn't hold him. Yeah! That's my king. That's my king. Yeah. The Bible says my king is the king of the Jews. He's a king.
Heavenly Father, pray that we would know Jesus as he truly is, that we would have a relationship with not a creation of our imaginations or of our ideals and our perceptions, but of who Jesus truly is. Would you help us to love him rightly, to know him well, to make him known in all that he deserves to be known for. We love him, Jesus, and we are so grateful that Jesus has first loved us. We pray these things in his name. Amen.
That amazing cadence of black preaching and the idea of listing and the interaction, very effective communication tools. And you'll rarely ever hear a white pastor try to do that. It could be, I think, just about as effective, but people would wonder what in the world is going on. But, you know, it's very, very effective preaching, especially when it's well constructed like what he just did. Now, does anybody have to leave early tonight? Does anybody going to be attacked by the flying monkeys or anything? We've got a few people that said they're going to have to be here late. So maybe instead, if it's up to you, or if it's okay with you, maybe we will wait maybe till after 7 or when everybody gets here. Should we do that? Will that bother you, mess up your system or what you got going? Okay, good. I think we should do that just so that everybody gets a chance to hear everybody else's stuff. Does that sound okay? All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign? You don't want? Okay. Well, oh, yeah, aye, okay. Carries. Okay, good. Please help yourself. We've got lots of goodies over there. I was thinking we'd have about a dozen people at our meeting. I think we had 5 or 6, so anyway, I kind of overdid it. Send me to Sam's Club and I kind of go crazy sometimes. Let's see, is this the latest one? Yeah, that's the latest one. Okay, so we've been talking about the God side of building a ministry, and we're still at the God side of things. And so one of the things we dealt with. Now, how many of you remembered your Myers-Briggs form, your Kiersey-Bates? How many did not? Does anybody not have their Kiersey-Bates filled out? I think you were all mailed them if you weren't here. Okay, you don't have yours filled out? Okay, the spankings will be after the, no. Okay, well, all right, if you've got yours, if you don't all have them filled out, it makes the next section worthless for those who don't. Can I just quickly look at your sheets here and see? Just go to the sheet in the back where the numbers are, and let's see. I'm going to quickly add these up. Here, tell us a joke or something. Okay.
The mind goes blank.
No.
All right, you can use mine. I know mine. I didn't. But I know.
Okay. Oh. Okay. Wow. I'm married to one of these. Are you stubborn?
I don't know, maybe.
Oh. Yes, you want.
Leslie's not here, you can say it. Wait, do you need this? No? I've taken it before.
Both of my siblings are very uncommon, really. Okay. You're right on the line between I and S. So you're 11 and 9, you're also on the line there.
Is that one of the answers? It's like you know the answer down that you want. That's probably the best way to do that.
Okay.
In that box.
Oh my gosh. Inside the wrapper.
Where's my scores?
So stupid.
Good, well. Let's take a little bit of time. Now, the Myers-Briggs has been around since the 50s. And since the late 70s, early 80s, it's used for graduate school applications. It's used by all the Fortune 500 companies. Some of the psychologists think, well, that's just silly because sometimes the answers will change. That's kind of why I wanted you guys all to take it, because sometimes you'll find that over a 5-year period or a 10-year period, you'll actually shift notably. But the Myers-Briggs is useful in that indeed it does change, and everybody tends to move towards the middle in all the categories as they get older, in my opinion. And I have used it for quite a few years, and it can be very helpful not to pigeonhole people, oh, that person is like this, but for me to understand why somebody acts and thinks the way they do. Because everybody perceives the world and they perceive themselves and where they get their identity from differently. So that's why I find it helpful with ministry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us on a little excursion here. So what are these things that are on here? What's being measured and why does it make any difference? It doesn't. We're just filling time. No, it makes a big difference. Huh, somebody wrote on this last week. Who would have that been? Let's see. I guess I've still got fingers. That'll work. Okay. Now, the Myers-Briggs has two halves. One half is where you get your reality. And you might want to sketch this out. And the other half is how you make decisions or choices. And actually whether you like making decisions or not. Some people don't like making decisions. Or they make them in a different way. So, what are we talking about? All right, first of all, the introvert versus the extrovert. The I versus the E. It's going to be a bad marker. Okay, an introvert, what do we normally think of as an introvert and extrovert? What's an introvert? Shy, okay. Keep to themselves. Somebody gets energized by being by themselves, yep. I'm married to an introvert who's as deep an introvert as I am an extrovert. Scary. Okay, what's an extrovert? Okay, yep, that works out that way. Okay, they're outgoing. They want to talk to everybody. Their favorite part of the church service is when everybody goes around and greets everybody. My wife hates that. Oh, I just want to be here with Jesus. Don't touch me. So that's in case you ever watch this, Brenda. Anyway, but the reason for that is that each of us have to have an identity. Identity is to the individual what a culture is to a people group. It's who you know that you are. And an introvert gains a sense of who they are from inside. They know who they are, but they have to get in touch with that all the time. And so they are energized by being alone because they feel good about themselves when they're with themselves. So they're nurtured from inside. And so they gain their sense of who they are from inside. Those are arrows going in. Okay? And so a lot of work with people. My wife teaching second grade and excuse me, Zach, may I touch you? I'm not going to hurt you. Oh, you prefer you don't? Yeah, because you're and I, yeah. My wife, Ms. Wells, Ms. Wells, Ms. Wells, Ms. Wells, Ms. Wells, Ms. Wells. She comes home and pulls the blankets up to about here and just kind of is in shock for a while. That's the introvert. The introvert needs that time. I go to a library to work on a paper or something, and I'm good for about 45 minutes, and then I've got to go out and talk to people. Hi, how about them twins? Or whatever. And where she goes to a library, and she's buried for 8 hours, and she comes home just happy as a clam and refreshed. Parties. I'd like to talk to people about all kinds of things. She just kind of wants to talk with one person in the corner. Okay, so an extrovert gains their sense of who they are from outside. So they constantly need to be in contact with people because their sense of self comes from their relationships and the feedback they get. Now, if you're an extrovert and you tell an extrovert, a strong extrovert, long enough that they've got a purple 6-foot tail, they'll start believing that. So they're more susceptible to criticism because they're attuned to the outside world more. Now, the other half of this is the intuitive sensate. Well, we've already used up the letter I, so we're going to just use the N here. That's the intuitive and sensate. What's that about? Okay. Almost all of you in this room were not alive when the space shots happened in 1962 to 1969, 70, 71. But it's maybe hard to believe, but when a space shot happened, every time they shot a rocket off, all 3 networks would give just several hours of coverage. Oh, there goes the rocket, and everybody watched it. I mean, in school, in John Glenn and the first things are. And one of the things we learned the first time we ever had this word was that you always ever watch Apollo 13? We have a problem, Houston. Well, they launched them from Cape Canaveral in Florida, but the headquarters was in Houston, and they would give a shot of the headquarters, and there was this huge room. with desks, just like you guys, but just, I mean, all kinds of desks. Everybody's in white shirts with dark ties and plastic pocket protectors and slide rules, and they're all sitting at a desk with lots and lots and lots of switches and knobs and cool stuff. And then up on the wall, 100 TV screens. They called them monitors. We'd never heard that term before. Monitors. All these monitors. And over here you could look, and here was the oxygen pressure, and here is how much fuel was left, and here was the temperature, and here was the temperature and the heat shields, and here was the location of it, and here's the radio signal strength. And I mean, every bit of data for that radio flight, or for that rocket flight, was on that wall someplace. So these guys could check and adjust their part of it. They all controlled, they were all called controllers, oddly enough, and they each had their desk and their switches, and they all watched all this stuff, and they did the right thing at the right time. And there were maybe, I don't know, 100, 200 people in this room, but all the data was on the wall. Now, an intuitive gains their sense of the world. They keep track of the world in their head, and they build the world in their head, and they have all the data about the world, like all these monitors up here. They've got that all in their head. And all that data is there, and they keep an inside world. They keep a world inside of them, and they compare that to the outside. But by keeping all that data messily in their heads, they're creative. They make connections between thought and poetry and literature and science, and they think sideways. They can think up and down. They can go any place on there and connect data, because they've got this big messy head that has all this information in it. And so that's an intuitive. Well, I know. I'm trying to make it nice, but
My wife would agree with you.
Yes. Well, no, but it's organized in its own thing, and it's kind of like looking at the world with a great big floodlight, because you kind of see everything, and you're holding all that stuff up in your head and interacting with it. Now, a sensate is just that. They're sensing the world, and they're looking at the world one little spot at a time. It's as if they've got a paper towel roll, paper towel tube, and they're looking at this, and they're looking at this, and they're looking at this, and they're looking at this very intently, and they're looking at this, and they're making a decision. Okay, here's this information, here's this information, here's this information, and gradually you build it up to the point where you make a decision, but you're very in tune with the world as an outside phenomenon. Now, an introverted intuitive tends to have their own bubble. They live in their head. Some more than others, like INFJs, INFPs, will tend to have their own reality bubble, which is a little, they're not as attuned to the outside. My wife, when driving, goes into her happy place. And I have, this, Scouts honor this is true. I have a couple times started out from church after her, and we'll get on 35W to head home, and I'll pull up behind her and I'll flash my lights a few times. Then I'll pull left of her, swing around, honking and waving, go out in front of her, flash my tail lights, wave, go to let her pass me. I go to her right side and do 3 loops around her, honking and waving, and she never notices me, because she's just kind of deep inside. Every year we go to the flower show, and all the women who are big-time gardeners are introverts. They like to be by themselves, and there's all these people just kind of staring off into space, thinking and feeling, and they're all bumping into each other all the time because they don't notice each other are there. I kind of feel like I'm on a Dodgem car sort of situation, because I know they've got this look in their face, faraway look, and they're all very happy, and they're just thinking of what this can be. So, yes. What did you end up as?
INFP.
Okay, yeah, you guys are a lot alike, and you're just barely P. Okay. Anyway, so this is a sensate is very in touch with the real world, and these are people that like to do detail. They think linearly. They don't think messy. They have tremendous focus. I have a son that is a sensate. And his intensity, he will, when he's going to think about doing something, he's got such tremendous intensity on it. When he was playing baseball, getting ready to play D1 college ball, he would be aware of where every baseball player was on the field at every time, what the last hitter did, what the pitcher's last throws have been, what the score is, how many outs, where the runners are, and he would have, that's a big picture thing, but his intensity of watching every detail on that field, he's a sensate. And he was very, very good at it. One of the things that drives me crazy is sorting stuff. I find it just mentally exhausting to sort stuff. And, well, okay, this conference coming up, I might want to go to that. I'll set that aside. And this one here, well, that goes in this folder, and this goes in this folder, and this will go in this folder. And after about an hour of that, my head is just swimming. I had a secretary who was an ESFJ sensate, and she was very J and very S. And she could sort out my entire desk in 10 minutes. And it was like watching Data on Star Trek, put the chips in. Ever watch that where he's the robot guy and he can, they speed him up. So she was just amazing. She could make those decisions, those sensate decisions so fast because she could look at each one and she didn't think of the possibilities of all these things. See, N's think of possibilities. N's think of, had another student. We've had 3 students, seminary students, go on from our congregation after spending their 2 or 3 years during seminary, to go on to PhDs in New Testament. Oddly enough, all 3 New Testament, all 3 were strong ISTJs. Now, they were not creative people, but they were very, very focused and very detailed. So they could get their Greek parsing down and they could memorize that and they could stay focused and they could, they just got her done. And they were brilliant, but they were focused, extremely, extremely focused. And one of them, they were all bright. And one of them is now a seminary professor down in Iowa. And I would talk about it. Now, the neighborhood's going to change in the next 5 years, and this is going to happen. This is either this or this will happen, and this will affect this, and this will affect this. And then over here, this is going to happen. Now, with the economy doing this, and if the economy happens with this, then this is going to happen, and this will be what ministry will look like, either this or this or this in this situation in 5 years. And he'd say, how do you do that? Well, you just look to see which way the pieces are moving, and you see how the pieces go together. He said, I can't do that. Now, that just kind of blew my mind, because to me, that's just how my head works. And but they're different giftings. He had a very economical head, very focused, like a laser beam, and that was a great gift. But he thought an entirely different way than I do, because I kind of have all this stuff that's out there, and I kind of bring it around into a big picture type thing. And it's a different kind of gifting. So intuitives keep the whole world in their head and they compare the outside. For example, now if I couldn't have told you whether you wear glasses or didn't wear glasses, or if I've ever seen you in glasses before. But when you walked in here tonight, it was different. Now I won't know 3 weeks from now what your glasses look like. But if they were different than those, I would know that, because you don't fit the you that's in my head. People would be coming out of church, and they'll, somebody, I'd say, oh, you got new glasses. Oh, that's a new dress. Or, oh, you got your hair cut. I have no idea what these people's clothes look like. I don't sit there and look in their clothes closet at night, peek in to what kind of clothes they have and keep track of them. But if somebody didn't fit the me, the them that was in my head, it was wrong or different. Not wrong, but it was different, and the bell went up. Bing, oh, that's different. They thought that was cool. I didn't think it was that's just my way my head works. So anyway, a lot of these people will be detail people. They will be people that that really follow policy and they enforce policy, and they're in middle management, or they're machinists, or they're accountants, people that like to create things, keep things in order. Give me a blueprint and I'll make it perfectly for you. This person, the intuitive, is probably the one that comes up with the new design. But the sensate is the one that makes it. These are the people that drew up the pyramids. These are the people that made them happen. Okay? So this is where do you get your reality? Where do you get your sense of self? And where do you get your sense of the world? Do you get it from inside yourself, or do you get it from outside yourself? Okay, so that's one half of the Myers-Briggs. Now the other half, okay, we've got, this is the easy one, think versus feel. Now, 60% of women are feelers, 40% of women are thinkers. 40% of men are feelers, 60% of men are thinkers. Now, I didn't say stinkers, I said the thinkers there. So what does that mean? Well, we've kind of got, this is something that in Western thought, the last 300 years or so, rational thought, numbers, facts, decision, justice, that's left brain. And under the Jeffersonian world picture, that was the male side of the world, and that was the public side of the world. And then the right side of the brain is feeling and color and music, and that typically that was seen as the female side of the brain. And usually the Enlightenment assigned religion to that side. And we could go into a long discussion of how that changed things, and how, after that, pastors got assigned to the female world, and we stuck them further and further into dresses and things like that. Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, Christianity was deeply feminized because we thought of feeling as being feminine. So a thinker uses this side of their brain if they're right-handed, and they want a nice rational machine, black and white decision, rational thought, and if they're right-handed, they're now occasionally people will switcheroonie as to where they're thinking and feeling and so forth, but normally right-handed people, their left side controls their right side, and normally that's their thinking side. And this is the feeling side over here, your right brain. And I mean, science tells us that you really have two brains. There's really two of you up there. Now, one of the interesting things is that in utero, there's a change that happens between male and female. Everything, if this is the front of your head, everything that you're conscious of right now is two little ping pong ball spots in the front of your head. Bing and bing. These are your frontal lobes. And all the rest of what's going on in your head, you have no awareness of it. It's all back there thinking and plotting. But a lot of your feelings and a lot of the other stuff that's going on, your subconscious, as Freud would call it, so forth, that stuff is all going on. Now, in utero, men and women, or males and females, have connections between both sides of the brains. And so that this side of the brain can talk to this side of the brain. In utero, those connections for males are cut off. So the only place that males have connection between their two half of their brains is up in their conscious lobes. So women process feelings, and it comes in, and it kind of affects the whole brain. Dumb old guys, we've got to actually stop and say, what am I feeling? And this is why we get heart attacks and die 10 years earlier. We have to stop and think, oh, I am feeling scared, I am feeling angry, I am feeling whatever, and we have to actually articulate that, write it down, or say it in our head, and then when it comes, then the feelings quit screaming at us, and then we can move it over to this side of the brain and start solving what the problem is, which is different from how women work. So that's one of the main things, is that the brains are wired differently. So either women are short-circuited or men are brain damaged. I'll let you pick. Okay, so Anyway, where you're at on this think feel, again, it's not just that women are feelers and men are thinkers. It's, you can see from your own score as to what your basic mode is. And now I'm right on the line. And I go back and forth between think and feel. When I'm doing creative stuff or music stuff or writing stuff and language stuff, then I'm on the feel side. When I'm typically in a sermon, I drive with the left side to have the logical progression and the thought and the structure. And then in the pulpit, the scary part is that I'll have my sermon all nicely written and I'll have all the biblical stuff and I'll have things and a few stories. And then all of a sudden, as I'm up there, sometimes the right brain, especially if it hasn't been kicking in all morning as I'm writing, or the night before as I'm writing this stuff, the right brain, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. Shut up, I've already got it written. No, it's a good story, it's a good story. Okay, all right. And you have to be very careful, as that's how you end up down a bunny trail. I went down 2 bunny trails. I went wild and crazy about 10 years ago in a sermon. And I got to the end of the second bunny trail, and I'd lost my place, lost my thought. Why did I go down that second bunny trail? And I turned to the congregation, I said, you know, that was a great story, but I don't remember why I told it. So let's get back to the sermon. And one of the church council members came up to me and said, I've never seen you do that before. I said, and you're not going to see it again. But anyway, I can actually hear, you know, the two, I don't hear voices or anything, but creativity, a story or an idea, an illustration will come, and I know that's the other side of the brain has finally awakened up, you know, and wants to give me, and sometimes it's really good because I didn't have enough stories. And anyway, so those sides of your head talk to one another, and both are good ways of doing that. Now, you know, if you're going to be thinking about your investing and whether you should be, what you should be investing in, and what rate of interest, and whether you should buy that car because you can afford it, or whether you should buy a car with a huge engine and whatever, that's probably a thinker side. That's probably a thinker side decision. But you know, maybe you also want a car that's really cool and it's got a nice interior and it's pretty and it's really makes you happy and that kind of stuff. You know, that's a feel type thing. But if you make the feel thing about, you know, you may end up with an Edsel, or you'll end up with something that you really shouldn't have bought because it's very pretty, but it's a pile of junk. You've got there's some kind of decisions. This is why it's so good to have 2 people in a couple and have them wired a little differently, because then their heads can talk together and think things through together and see things from different angles. Okay, now this one is the hardest one to understand, and it makes the biggest difference. Okay, this is going to be the difference between, and by the way, I'm going to tell you a story with an embarrassing ending. And I'm going to use a impolite word maybe. Okay, this is called the JP, judging versus perceiving. And this one is hard to describe. If you think of a politician that doesn't want to make a decision, we talk about him walking on the fence. Okay? Now, J's are very uncomfortable walking on the fence. They're very uncomfortable until a decision is made. And once a decision is made, you're there. So they walk on a fence that's 1 inch wide. I am a really lousy artist. 1 inch wide and 6 feet high. So when they finally make a decision and jump, they don't easily change their mind and go over to the other side. They have made their side. So they are black and white. They make decisions and they stick to them. They are loyal. They are, there's good and there's bad. And once I've decided this, and they see faith in terms of decision. So if you've got a decision theology type of thing, you know, this kind of, and this was the main personality type in the World War II generation. And so decision theology, I made my decision for Jesus with Billy Graham or so forth. This worked very well with that generation because once they had articulated a decision, boom, they were there. Okay, sorry, Ken, I can't talk right now. Okay. the opposite. They go through a fence, they go through life on a fence that's 6 inches high and 6 feet wide. And they would rather go through life without making a decision if possible. They would just as soon not make a decision because, oh, they can come over and they can look at this, and then they can, well, they'll come back up here and go over and look on this side, and then come over here. And maybe they kind of like to stay down here. If they do go here, they don't have to stay there. And in fact, they'll maybe look at, maybe try to find a third path. They make decisions very differently. They make decisions kind of by looking at all of the different data, and let's see where it adds up, and we'll kind of, the committee votes 60-40, and we'll go over this way. And this is really, since the baby boomers, each generation has gotten to be more perceiving. And so they do not see faith in terms of decision. They tend to see faith as kind of like being magnetized. Have you ever done the experiment when you're in grade school? You take a pin and you rub it on a magnet, and it magnetizes the pin or the nail. You can put it on top of cork and float it in water, and it turns into a compass. So faith is kind of caught. Faith is nurtured. Faith is kind of a slower magnetism oftentimes in a P person, and it doesn't look like the same kind of faith as a real strong J person. The faith development looks different. They may come to a crisis point where they make a commitment or make a decision, or something becomes clear to them. The Holy Spirit works in their heart and draws them, but it's much more of a magnetism type thing. Does that make sense? Now, P's see whereas J's see black and white, good and bad, kind of a bifurcated two-pole world of a switch, tick, 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 tick. P's see the world in many, many shades of gray. They can make 15 distinctions between A and B. Years ago, we had a lot of Lao kids in this congregation. Laotian language, somehow they have 7 consonants between P and B. And they can hear the difference between P and B. They've got 7 consonants that they can hear the difference of. I don't know how, but they can hear that distinction. Now, if you get P's and B's on a committee or a church council or on your team, J's are going to be very uncomfortable until a plan has been made, and they're going to want to stick to it. P's will be uncomfortable once a decision is made, and they'll want to be, kind of nudging it this way or nudging it that way as you learn about it. Now, the danger with P's is they may not stick to it long enough to make it bear fruit. Danger with J's is they may keep going until they go off the cliff. J's see P's as being weak-willed and wishy-washy and not sticking to something. P's see J's as stodgy and stubborn and legalistic maybe, and so it's a great source of discomfort between people because they look at reality different. They make a decision. Now, my wife will struggle with a decision, and then she'll just, once she's made it, once everything feels right, she clicks. Now, you couldn't hear it, but I can hear it. It's just like breaking a glass rod. And once that decision has been made, it's impossible to change her mind. I have changed her mind after she's made it up twice in 40-some years of knowing her. And one of them was under the effects of anesthesia with childbirth, whether our son was going to be called Roland John III or John Roland. Well, he's called R. John Wells III, but that was one of the 2 times, and I can't remember what the other one was. It was something very small, but it was notable. Because once that's what I want. And once that happens, she's a J. She's just J, J, J. Now, I'm a weak J. So I like to make decisions, but I know, for example, if she's not going the way I'm going, I go, well, you should look at this option, and this over here, and this could be, have you thought about this? And if I can keep her from getting to the point where she goes, then there's chances then of kind of forming or shifting things a little bit until she thinks it through. Aren't I devious? No, that's just, couples got to find ways to work things through. And so J's tend to make up decisions. Now, if you're super, super, super J, or if you're super, super, super P, you're going to have a hard time making a decision. Because it's, both ends have a hard time, because J's just, real super J get very nervous over decisions, because there's so much in these things, so much going on, buying a car or whatever, or same thing with the P's. Huh? Picture, yes. Yeah. Well, and for some reason, it often seems that God has decided to inflict J's upon P's and P's upon J's. We've had a whole bunch of young pastors come through here that are ENFPs, who are the entrepreneurs and the world's greatest youth director or used car salesman. And every one of them has married an INFJ. INFJs are people that are just really focused and idealistic, like my wife, and very, very just rock solid stubborn. Well, one of my buddies was teaching some of his seminarians about the Myers-Briggs and teaching about this, and that night, this is the naughty part. The seminarians don't you wonder what it's going to be? Seminarians they wanted to go to a movie, this guy and his wife, so they were going to the big multiplex, and there's all these movies, and he's a P and she's a J. He's really P, she's really J. And he walks and he says, "Oh, that's a good story. That I wanted to see." And that time's wrong on that one. That one, oh, that's funny. Oh, this one hasn't had a good review, and that's a good one too. Oh, I'd like to see that one. She said, "I want to see that one." He said, "Well, no. How about this one? Because this one really is and this one, there's three of them there I could really go for, and I want to go with that one." And he stops for a second. He says, "You got to be sure you think through what you're saying before you say it publicly." He said, "Look, honey, it's just like that test. You're showing your J-ness, and I'm showing my..." Said this out loud, and every head in the building turns towards him as he talks about showing him certain parts of himself. Anyway, so so don't make up new words. Get yourself in a heap of trouble. So that's the Myers-Briggs, and so whether you like making a decision, and whether you make that decision with your head or your heart, so to speak, head or heart, make a huge difference, about if you make a feeling decision that's really J, those people are just super, super, super loyal to that decision. In fact, the J's themselves tend to be super, super, super loyal. Now, some of these constellations, we've got some, who are the ISTJs? You are? Any other ISTJs? Okay, ISTJs are the golden retrievers of the world. They are and most of them are guys, and they are the most faithful. It's almost impossible for them not to be faithful. They're loyal friends. They get the job done, and they are just I have always, even though I'm not an ISFJ, I'm quite different, but I've always loved ISFJs because my whole world is full of ISTJ. Did I say FJ? ISTJ. Any ISTJs? Thank you. ISFJs are close too, but that's a little different. So. Yeah, that's just, every church runs on ISTJs. The guy that takes care of the building, the people that make sure the ushers are there. In this congregation, the woman that makes sure the Christmas tree gets up and the communion is set up is an ISTJ. She's just always there and always faithful, and it just happens. And those are some of the people that God puts on teams so the work gets done, because they do it all. And they also sometimes get frustrated by the fact that other people are dumping all the work on them. So if you're working with an ISTJ, give them a little tiny pat on the head every once in a while, because they need it. And if they don't get it, they will burn out. And you're not manipulating them, you're just showing appreciation. Don't forget to show appreciation to people. But ESTJs need a lot of appreciation, although ESFJs and ISFJs, same thing. Okay, now we're going to split into two parts, or we're going to split this down the middle on each of these things, and we're going to talk about each of the personality types. Now, before I do that, now some of you, I said, some of you were just 4 letters, and you were so clearly those 4 letters that you go back. The introvert files are yellow, and the extrovert files are red. There's no significance to the color. Those are the two colors we had. Some of you have X's. If you're like 812, 812 only means you're 2 numbers apart if it's EI. Or 911 or something like that, or 12-8, well, anyway, same thing. And so if you've got an X, you're going to have to take both sides of that. So if you're an X on intuitive and sensate, you'd pull both of those. So we'll do that in our first break here, is go and get those things. But, okay, from what I've said so far, do you have some questions about what this is about? We're going to apply it further on as to what this means for people working together.
Wasn't there a part of the Patty Lane book where she talked about it at the beginning?
Well, she talks about the different lenses. I don't think she talks about Myers-Briggs. I don't think so. Someplace there you had a sheet on Myers-Briggs, which was passed out a while ago. Yeah, that's what I just went over on the board. Okay. Questions, comments? Oh, and those of you who are SJs also think this is really stupid. I'm sorry. You might. But those of you who are NTs are probably just eating this, and NFs are probably just eating this up because you. What?
Why do they think it's so?
Well, because everybody, that's just who I am. That's just who I am. Why do I need letters? What difference does this make? At least that's what my son says. This is just dumb. You're just pigeonholing me. Maybe I shouldn't say all think that, but I'm prone to generalization. Sorry. No questions about any of these? Any questions about where you are with the think, feel, EI, NS? Enneagram is a little different, but that's another personality test like this. DISC is another one. Again, any of these things they're not the Minnesota multiphasic. It's not going to tell whether you're crazy, or it's not going to, all it's doing is helping you to, where we're going to go with this is it ultimately helps you understand why people do things. When I learned that Brenda lives in this whole world in her head, and she's stubborn because when she feels something very deeply, she can't imagine anything being otherwise. She wasn't trying to drive me crazy. Her head works different than mine. And that was a real good thing, probably, if it didn't save us from a divorce, maybe a murder or something, but we were able to understand each other a little better. Yeah, you laugh now. No, just kidding. No, Billy Graham used to say that he thought his wife probably hadn't thought so much about divorce as murder, so I guess I can steal his line. Okay, are you ready for some thrills, chills, and excitement? Now, here's what you're going to get up here in just a moment. Now, depending upon where you are on the introvert-extrovert, there's only 10 numbers on that one. We're going to put the introverts over there, and we're going to put the extroverts over here. So if you're a 10-0 introvert, you'd be against the wall. If you're a 5-5, you'd be right here in the middle, and so forth down. And if you're a 10-0 extrovert, you're like me, you'd be over on this wall. Okay, on your mark, get set, go. Dump, dee-dump, dee-dump, dump, 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 dump. Huh? Where were you on the introvert-extrovert? Where were you on the introvert-extrovert? 6-4, okay. Which is the 6? 6 introvert? Okay, so you want to go over that way. My goodness, are we the only extroverts in this place? Come on. No other extroverts? Okay, yeah, well. Okay, So what does this mean? Okay, you guys are probably not the ones to be, A, working in retail, B, not to be probably the front desk person. You're a person who will, once you understand the task, you can work in back. You will work great one-on-one. You'll have a handful of close relationships and very meaningful ones. You'll be able to learn people skills if you wish, but basically you want to work kind of by yourself, and you have a sense of what your job is, and you get it done. Now, if you're an IN, you're even more solitary. We'll talk about that in a minute. Where are the extroverts? Holy smokers. Okay. The extroverts these are people that are the people out in front. They're the people person that they've got their antennas way out, and they're constantly aware of their interaction. You can look in an extrovert's eyes, and they're always focused out here someplace. Introverts, when you look in an introvert's eye, you're kind of drawn in, and there's a whole universe inside them, especially the INs. Okay, I can look at INs, and I can pick INs out of a crowd by the way that their eyes work. Now, those of you who are down the middle, that's a gift, because you are people that can work by yourself, or you can work with a group. And you can do the front people thing. You probably won't find it exhausting. Some of you have a bunch of X's, like my son is an XNXX. So he's kind of a utility infielder. He can be all things to all people. Now, somebody that's got really strong preferences will going into the right job, will do better at that job than my son will. Just like somebody that's a fabulous shortstop will probably play shortstop better than the utility infielder. But the utility infielder is the utility infielder because he can play first if he needs to. He can play second, which is very different. And he can play shortstop, can play third base. They're all related skills, but they're very different. And so I'm an ENXX. Feel I'm on the line, and JP, I'm just a little J. Okay, so you're our extrovert. You and me, kid. Wow. Okay, and you guys too have that, and you guys are probably, it's not that you can't do people skill stuff, no, not by any means, but you are refreshed and you need your time away. You need your time away. And you need, you have your sense of call as well as your sense of self comes from inside. And that's, and so you tend to not get derailed by other people's comments and other people's attitudes as quickly. You know, we've got to be careful. I talked about the 6-foot purple tail. Okay. All right, intuitive sensate. Intuitive's over here, and sensate's over here. Sensate's over on the left side. Okay. Okay, 19 and 1, yeah. You guys are, and you're 20 and 0. 19 and 1, okay. And you were which one? I knew the numbers, pretty strong that way, okay. Now what does this mean? Okay, you guys are big picture people, vision. If you're an introvert, you have your own little bubble, and you will listen to God's will. You are the visionaries. You are the people who will march into hell for a heavenly cause. INFJs, Mother Teresa, Joan of Arc, people that come up with the whole new idea, the whole new theory, a lot of writers. You teach even though you find it exhausting because you are drawn to that, and that is your calling, right? Yeah, and you know that, and that's idealism. NFs are super idealistic. Okay. Now, NTs, you guys are going to come up with the big theories. If you're an ENT, you're the commanding general. If you're an INT, you live in a theoretical world. Any INTJs here? Okay. INTP, yeah, you can turn ideas over in your head and you can change them around and also write big books. Or philosophers, scientists turn ideas around, gain different perspectives, doesn't get stuck in one paradigm, that kind of stuff. Okay, and sensates, you guys that are over here, you like to get her done. So show me what the job is, outline it, and with great focus and great direction, you're going to get it done. So a lot of people in middle management or people in detail-oriented careers are going to tend to be in this S side of things. And that's a great gift. You can do things like detail or organizing faster and better than anybody else. And that's a great gift. And so nice, clean thinking, like Danish modern. It just, you know, clean lines, very focused thinking, focused on getting the job done. Now, those of you who, like me, are in, well, no, I'm an N. I'm about here. Sorry. I'm about here. Okay, now, with the NS, that is also a gift. Now, again, because you can get the big picture and you can understand the big picture and you can talk about the big picture, communicate it with other people, but you can also do detail if called upon to do that. And that's important, especially, see, if you're working in a small office. You need to be able to see the big picture, but then you need to be able to put nuts and bolts on it. And to be able to work both ways and to see things both ways is a great sense of maturity. And it, again, you probably all will move more towards the middle, because the big picture people, especially in your first 15 years of jobs, are going to end up having to do more detail than you ever wanted to, alphabetizing paper clips and things. Okay, and those of you who are sensates, you will get more and more of the big picture, and you will, it's mind-boggling and it's sometimes frustrating, but that also will help you as to how you function in the bigger organization. And you guys are the ones that are the peacemakers that make it all happen and can swing with both sides of your brain, can, you know, so to speak. Okay, does that make sense? And can see both pictures. Okay, now let's do think and feel. Thinkers over here, and feelers over here. You guys get to be over by the cookies. Okay. Oh, all right. Thinkers, okay. You guys think it through, get it done. Think it through, get it done. You guys especially. That's, you know, great gift. And now you're an intuitive thinker. You got to be working on the big picture stuff and different ways, the big plan and how it all fits, and discovering and reading and getting more information, and an idea pumping out guy. Theoretical type, thinking out type person. All right, so that was think. You guys are all feelers, huh? How do you feel about that? Well, that's great. Now, those of you who are, how many of you are EFs? Extrovert feelers? Okay, that's right. That's thank you. And the rest of you are introverted feelers. Okay, so you guys are either, okay, like I said, the INF and the INT are the big picture people, the theoretical people, and the ISF are really the caregivers, the great caregivers, kindergarten teachers, one-on-one, nurturers, nurses, caregiving professionals, nurturing people very much on a one-on-one type thing. This would be discipling people, caring about them. This is a great gift. And so as your my father-in-law was a guy, ISFJ, and he was a great nurturer. I think I got the job of raising Brenda because her family was all out camping, and I dated her a couple times, like in January, February, and I called and she said, the voice on the other end of the phone says, "I'm sick," and so I drove 25 miles over the other side of Minneapolis, and I stopped and picked up some Pepto-Bismol and some 7-Up and some crackers, and knocked on the door, and she thought it was her parents coming home, and she came down in her skimpy nightgown, and with her bangs off her forehead with a rubber band. It was kind of like a quail. Anyway, and I said, here, you're sick, you need this, I'll be in touch, bye. And at that point, she thought she had another good caretaker, I guess. And I, kind of like the Chinese, when you save somebody's life, you get stuck taking care of them the rest of your life. It's something like that. Anyway, I've got that caregiver side, but I'm not an ISFJ. But ISFJs need that caregiving side. And they love coziness. They love baking cookies and tradition and special things and times with family and that kind of stuff. ESFJs too. They're the great people for keeping traditions. SJs live in the past, loyal to the past. NFs live in the NFs and NTs live in the future. SPs live now. So, all right, now let's go to the last one. J and P. J's over here, and P's over here. You can work in a urinary clinic. Or with Green Giant, they sell peas. Okay, anyway, all right, so again, a P will tend to be much more flexible. You put them into a situation, something like the city, it can be very good to have that flexibility. Because in the city, you can't always stay with plan A, because things keep changing all around you. And a lot of cultures have a lot of flexibility, more so than other cultures. And some can be very inflexible in their attitudes, but time and a lot of other things are very flexible. So you know, the JP thing works out differently in different cultures. So you guys are flexible. You want to be careful that you don't change direction too fast. One of the dangers for Ps is they give up too soon. And in ministry, that's deadly. On the other hand, keeping going when there's an obvious need for a course change because you're running off a cliff or you're about to run into a tree, then you need to have some flexibility with that. Now, J's, the good thing about, J's, you're going to tend to stick with something and you're going to make up your mind and you're going to tend to stick with that task, with that goal, whatever. But again, you're going to have understanding of the P people because they may ask you hard questions about well, why? Little things like that. So, okay, so that's kind of where you guys sit on this thing. It's very surprising that we had so few E's. Wow, well, okay. Let's take about a 10-minute break, grab goodies, and then we're going to start with our presentations, and I'll come back with this stuff later. 2, 3.
I think he's going to start it off. Mike, you want to start it?
Sure.
We're just going to go in order.
Yep.
Doesn't he look kind of like him? For like section 3 and 5, I like didn't know what to write. 'Cause I feel
Some
like
of
there
them we
wasn't
just
a
had
lot
a lot more information than others. Well, it looks like
It's probably not the best thing to write in a project right there. Did you read that?
Is that right? Hey, we got it.
There we go. All right, there you go.
All right, are we ready to start? Yeah. Get ready, get ready. Hold on to your seats, everybody.
If you're not ready, you are now.
You better be now. So we went and visited Jericho Road Ministries, and the director there is a guy named Jeff Noyed. I think I'm saying that correct. And the director of development is John Bonsack, but we didn't meet him, and we didn't even meet Jeff as a group here. He had one of the interns of the local church come and present their ministry. So we'll get a picture of the leadership in a little bit, but we had a great conversation with them, and it took some good turns, some unexpected turns, but it was really, really edifying in my personal experience. So they exist for the kind of the three pictures of what they want to be about, helping with alleviate poverty in their neighborhood. They want to be a very local ministry, connecting with people around them. They want to do relief work. So when somebody comes in crisis or hungry, or they need a ride to their interview for a job, they want to be able to provide very practical relief solutions in the midst of some chaos and some crisis for their neighbors. Beyond that, they want to help do community development. So if somebody needs some job training, they are going to make networks and connections for those folks so that they don't kind of stay in a crisis position long term, but there's some development. And they see if a person is developed, they want to see that that person then becomes focused on not just their own life, but the community around them, civic minded and community focused. They don't want to kind of stay, yeah, that made sense. And then ultimately the goal for their ministry is to help people know Jesus. And the story behind that is John had for a long time been leading a ministry that was as well doing mercy ministry, relief work, community development. I did not catch the name of that organization. I don't know if you guys did. Okay, John, or Roland knows all about it. John was directing that for many years. As he retired, Jeff was put in an application to take that director role. It wasn't accepted. Somebody else was there, but then the whole organization was making a shift, and the director was kind of, by my understanding, was kind of forced to say, we're going to go a little bit more socially liberal, secular-based in our relief work. Well, Jeff, in his heart of hearts, was all about the Lord, all about wanting to introduce people to Jesus, to be the hands and feet of the Lord for the poor, for those in their neighborhood, and realizing if I stay in that role, I'm not going to be able to continue to do that work the way that I feel the Lord has led me. He knew God was saying do something different. So out of that change in what they had been doing, how they had been working together in the past, they realized that something new has to change. And so in 2011, Jericho Road was launched, and it came out of a partnership with Bethlehem Baptist Church and Bethlehem Urban Initiatives, now Bethlehem Ministry Initiatives, I think it is. And so they have a lot of, for the leadership, here are the two gentlemen, Jeff Noyed and John Bonsack. They have a couple other people that are on the board of advisory board, but we didn't get into much detail of how that works. They have 7 people that meet with them that have some accountability. They are accountable financially through Bethlehem. They've got some oversight there. But almost, from my understanding, a lot of the day in and day out decisions is purely through Jeff and John. They're there, they're working. They've got a team of about 12 volunteers, probably about 3 a day, that come in and do one-on-one interviews and work with the people that are in need that come to their ministry. Those volunteers are trained through Jeff primarily, so he's worked with them. His DNA, his calling, his passion has really infused everything about Jericho Road. One of the things that, so in terms of the leadership, one of the things that I personally felt was poignant and a little bit sad in this, and I know I'm kind of putting an opinion to this, which I don't think was part of our project. About a year ago, Jeff's daughter died. She was in her early 20s, died very unexpectedly. And he made a comment to us, and he said, other people in other roles in other places likely would have been able to pull off for 6 months or more, have some recovery, have some grieving, have some healing. And he said, I couldn't leave. This thing wouldn't keep going. And so in terms of a leadership structure, it seems not very deep right now. It seems like without Jeff running the show, a lot would fall through the cracks, and probably too much so. So the ministry is incredibly compassionate, incredibly effective at reaching their neighborhood, but very focused on Jeff's heart and soul and work through Jeff. So that's why they exist and their leadership.
And as far as thinking for growth, from my memory, I don't think he kind of was mentioning that they're at, like, with their staff and their budget and everything that's going on, that they're kind of in a comfortable spot, kind of. But I know he was talking about Jubilee Church potentially opening up a church over in North Minneapolis, and then also just because the need is so great there as far as helping individuals with just day-to-day life. And then he also mentioned Dayton's Bluff and East St. Paul. And I kind of got when he was talking about joining them over there in North Minneapolis, because I think they are going to be opening a church. Jubilee Church is going to be planting another church over there. I couldn't tell if he was talking about the ministry moving over there, or if he was talking about just himself as far as his ministry goes. So, but I think that was kind of, as far as like future outlook, just going to more places that are in need, such as East St. Paul and North Minneapolis. And then the focus of the ministry is, Jericho Road, Luke 10, verses 25 through 37. Just want to read it quick, just so we can get an idea. On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. And then Jesus asks, What of the three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hand of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So, I mean, this is kind of the whole idea of Jericho Road's ministry, is being the good neighbor and taking care of the people that are unfortunate or beaten down or stricken, and don't really have the help that they really, other people aren't willing to give them. They're trying to give those people what other people aren't giving them. And so that's kind of like the focus as far as their ministry goes. As far as evangelizing goes and all that, I mean, they're not on the street corners preaching the word and all that, but they're allowing people to come in so they can give help to them in the areas of needs that can actually make a difference, and then in effect will impact the whole community on first on an individual basis, and then hoping those people will go out and affect the community as well. And so it's really that kind of focus as far as the ministry goes. They also do like a meal on Fridays, and so basically they just invite people in. They sign in. They don't have to like show an ID or anything, and then they will maybe preach a word for about 15 minutes or so, just kind of keep it short, and then after that they will feed them, and then just kind of conversate with them, and then have volunteers kind of mingling within the crowd. And so they do both of those things. And so really it's just like an individual basis kind of evangelist type of ministry, and helping the unfortunate. Food shelf here.
Just the other part of that focus is providing a food shelf for anybody who needs to come in on Friday. After the sermon, I believe they open up for any of the supplies that are available. People can feel free to get the food that they need.
Then real quick, funds. I thought this was really interesting. So like, as far as the funds go, and Mike had talked about how Jeff had kind of felt called away from his other ministry and then into something new. And so they held 4 prayer meetings, basically just praying where God was leading them, asking for startup money. And the startup money was $40,000. And so after four prayer meetings, they kind of got this idea of the ministry, and the money came. And then eventually, they built the budget up to, right now it started at about $100,000 a year, and then jumped up to $200,000 a year, and those costs, cover the needs that people have, and then also rent at the church, and they have one full-time employee, which is Jeff, and then 2 part-times, John and Lori, and so really, yeah, their budget kind of comes from, so Jeff, he'll write letters to different people and ministries and stuff, and then they'll donate, and then the rest comes from church grants and other grants. And so that's kind of the funding.
Okay, we'll move on to communication, and kind of the big picture that I saw with that is I think the most important communication is relational. So John Bonsack and Jeff have lived in the Phillips neighborhood, I think both of them for their whole life, or the majority of their life. So they're just really connected with a lot of the resources and ministries and individuals that live in the neighborhood. So when they have clients that come who maybe cannot, they can't provide for all of their needs, they know which ministries or which other organizations to refer them on to. And then also with that, they often get referrals because of relationships that they have. So he was talking about, for example, he has a strong friendship with a Muslim man, Muhammad Hussein, I think is his name, who is related to Ilhan Omar, who is now our representative. But this guy is really influential in the Somali community, and even though this is a Christian organization, this Muslim leader will refer Somalis to come in to the food shelf on Fridays. But they do have written communication as well. So this is from their website. They have they do monthly newsletters, and I think it's both to inform people about the ministry and then also to raise support. So he said I think 60% of their funds comes through the newsletters that they send out. So I pulled these pictures off of the website, and they kind of give you an idea that there's a variety of different cultures that are represented and that come into the ministry. He said, I think because of the demographics of the neighborhood, they tend to get the majority are Latinos that come in at least on Fridays and utilize the food shelf and then go to the services that they have on Fridays. So because of that wasn't necessarily the demographic they set out to reach, but because of the demographics of the neighborhood, they've kind of adapted their ministry especially to reach Latinos. So their Sunday or their Friday services, often they'll have a Spanish speaker give the service, but if they don't, if they have an English speaker, they'll always provide translation. And then I've already mentioned they have a really good relationship with this Somali leader in the community. So about 30 Somalis regularly come on Fridays, which I thought was kind of interesting because it's a very openly Christian ministry, but I think because of the relationship that they have, the Somalis will even sit through these services, these Christian services on Fridays. Okay, and I think we have one more. Yeah, so the last section is on theology and prayer. And Ben already talked a lot about the Good Samaritan as the basis of their principal passage that they use as their inspiration for their ministry, and the idea of reaching out to people that maybe have fallen by the wayside in the journey of life. I also put the vision that they have for their ministry to see families and individuals nutritionally fed, housed, clothed, gainfully employed, community-minded, freed in Christ, and part of a local church. And I liked that because I feel like it really speaks to the holistic focus of the ministry. So they're really focused on meeting these physical needs, but then ultimately they do want people to be freed in Christ and part of a local church, and they really try to bring in the spiritual need or spiritual counseling as they encounter individuals. They also talked a lot about the importance of prayer. So their ministry was started, I think Ben also mentioned the ministry was started through prayer and kind of putting out this, he said putting out a fleece, but I'm imagining like asking God, like, if you want us to start, provide the funds. And he said they still pray over every fundraising letter they send out, and then they pray with their clients and have lots of individuals praying for their ministry. All right, and I think that's all we have, so questions.
You might have covered it, but is there any part of their mission that's volunteer-based?
Yeah.
The people that, is there like a large number on certain days of the week?
What was the question?
Yeah, so
Volunteers.
as far as, so Jeff is the only full-time employee, and then there's also 2 other part-time employees. Otherwise, as far as like the individual, the one-on-ones and like the food shelf and all that stuff, that's all volunteers, basically, yep.
They come from churches, or how did they talk about how they come to find people? Or?
Yeah, they kind of come from all kinds of different churches, I believe.
I think a number of them were from Bethlehem, from the churches that John and Jeff personally are part of. He mentioned there's 12 that are trained to do the one-on-one assessments and start to provide some of the immediate relief. But then at the large Friday morning, there might be 30 or 50 volunteers interacting socially, but not with the discipleship and emphasis that the other 12 have really been crafted to be able to do.
If you think of our tripartite model, how does that fit with what they're doing?
He reminds us of what the three parts were.
Proclamation of the gospel in the midst of human need and relationships.
I guess I feel like they're doing all of it. They're probably more strategic in the meeting, like the physical needs, and they're very relational. But I think because they're so relational, they have a heart to share the gospel. So that just happens naturally as they're encountering all these people.
Yeah, I think they're fairly centered. Individually, they know our aim, our goal is to communicate the gospel to people. And through meeting the needs, building relationships with them, we'll have those opportunities. They're consistently looking for that. They're providing those opportunities so that they can do that.
They're probably the most perfect example of our model in the Twin Cities.
They're the most perfect example. There you have it.
Of our model. Of our model.
Any other questions? I'll just say, kind of to wrap up, it was an encouragement for us to go and to see Jeff's heart, Jeff's passion, and the work that's happening there. You know, I look forward to, as a part of my work, continuing to engage with Jeff.
Good mentor. Yeah. I met Jeff the first time when I was a 7th grade confirmation teacher. I was 20, and I can't take any credit whatsoever, but he turned out good. But I've known him since 1973. That's a long time.
Who's next?
Okay, good job. Next, who's up?
All right, Trinity First Lutheran School was the ministry that we visited. And I guess I'll just start off with just a couple quick observations in terms of the simplicity of what they're doing, the dedication of the people who are there, the sense of community and family, and then the Christ-centeredness was just amazing. So I think that those are a few of the themes that you'll see as we talk about what they're doing. So I think their mission statement, because they're, as I mentioned, simple. They're living right off of this. Their mission of equipping learners, sharing hope. So Trinity First School will impact our community by be known as a high-quality educational center for children, their families, and our community. So they're right here in South Minneapolis. They've been here for a long time. We'll talk more about that. But even as the demographics has changed here and the culture, the economics has changed here, they've adapted with that. And you'll see right over there, their enrollment reflects that in terms of we'll talk more about this later, but some of the percentages and the ethnic diversity that's reflected in their school. And notice it's not just for their children. For children, it's for their families. So they really see the extension of their education goes to the families. So they're doing some things, we'll talk about that in terms of how they come alongside the children and their families and equip the the parents or the guardians to be able to care for and help raise these kids. We strive to support and encourage learners to become productive citizens for our country here on earth and ultimately citizens of heaven. So it's not just educational, academic achievement, but to actually be well-grounded, balanced, productive people who walk with God. And then our students and their families will experience their school as a growing family. So it truly is everyone's enfolded into the family there, and they'll learn together, they'll support one another, serve together, and share the love of Jesus with one another. So there was really a great focus in terms of, hey, we're here to make disciples of these kids and lead these kids to Jesus. So in terms of their leadership, you know, in terms of like a corporate leadership structure and even some of the things related to board of directors and those sorts of things, not a whole lot of that going on, because part of it is just the longevity of the leaders that they've had in place. So for example, Sarah is the principal, and she's been there over 20 years as the principal, which is kind of hard to believe. I don't know how old she is, but she started relatively young, and I think she became a principal early on, and she's been there for a long time. And she is just now getting a leadership team around her. But I think she's had a lot of authority over the years, but she's a great leader. So it's worked. And so really, but she's sharing leadership, and she's getting these folks around her to help build kind of a leadership team, and they're each doing their part, and it's truly just kind of an organic, the body of Christ working together. And then you can't really see it in this picture down here, but that's the sense of family that flows from this group of leaders, and then their teachers, and then you got this multi-ethnic. I think it says, building a family of culturally diverse Christian disciples. And that's truly what I see them doing.
Okay, so the school started in 1859 when the congregation asked their pastor to teach their own kids. They needed someone to teach English so that they could read the Bible. So since then, their focus has changed to reaching all children and offering them, as Ward was saying, a solid Christ-based education to equip them for life here, but also life in heaven. So as a result, they have a mosaic of cultures and diversity in their school body. Their administrative staff, their committee, their teachers all have a Christian faith. That's an essential part, because families, students, they don't necessarily have the Christian faith, but the structure, the support system is all based on the Christian faith. The church comes from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and so the team, the committee, they're all guided through these people. They consider themselves missionaries to their community, and the education is their tool for reaching the children and their families. Most of the children are coming from low-income, non-Christian families, and many of them struggle with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so they have behavioral and social challenges. Many of the children, this is their last chance at school because they've been rejected or sent away from other schools, and Trinity First welcomes them to their school and loves on them. The way that they keep their focus is that every morning they start with devotions and prayer. And you can imagine how that is encouraging and how that helps them to keeping their focus on Christ and keep serving and loving the kids and their families. In recent years, they've added family education nights, and this is how they minister to the parents. They offer different topics that are related to their needs as parents. And then they say that they have spiritual warfare that is going on with, and so that's where their prayer really comes in. It's essential. They cannot do school without prayer. And they often send out weekly prayer emails and quarterly newsletters to those who are praying for the school and for them, and that's how they keep their focus. Okay, then the funding is the next section, and Anne Van Fleet, the one who talked with us a few weeks back, she is the one who does all the paperwork for the payroll, but the principal, Sarah, is the one who oversees everything. She's kind of like the final word. It has to go through her to get approval. Anna, or? Mm-hmm. We asked her if an audit had ever been done, and she wasn't sure if it had. It's a very informal accountability structure that they have between the principal and the administrative team. It's more like a family. The school tuition is based on the family size, income, and situation, and it's a 3-tier system that they have developed. And the parents, if they participate in the school events, then they can lower the tuition. And so that's how they help these low-income families. But most of their funding comes through donations from individuals. In 2008, they established a foundation, and this foundation provides financial and prayerful oversight and security to the funding for the school. They also have opportunities for people to give through Amazon, Smile, and Box Tops for Education, or that you can donate through different organizations like My Charity Map or Wells Fargo or Greater Twin Cities United Way. They have all these different ways that you can do it online, which I thought was good. Another way that they help with funding is volunteers. They have a lot of in-kind donation through volunteer hours, or maybe people are giving things to the school. But definitely the school operates by faith in God's provision. They didn't know where the next, they have a need for expansion. They said, we're just relying on the Lord to provide the funding for that. Okay, the next section.
Jump back to 3, because it makes sense to talk about after. Okay.
I have the next section. Oh, no, you
Yeah,
do.
but we didn't do this one, so we skipped it accidentally. No, that's okay. It makes more sense to talk about this one after funding anyway. So in terms of thinking for growth, a lot of that at Trinity First is centered around space. And like Janet was talking about, they're just relying on God prayerfully to receive the funding that they need to increase their space. And their building is pretty old. It was constructed back in the time when there was a lot of gang violence going on, so there are no windows in any of the classrooms, which is pretty unique for a school, or at least any school that I've been in. So there's a couple of classrooms here, but I included these pictures because they're good illustrations for the type of growth that they need. So this is the 3rd grade classroom in the top left corner here, and what you see is what you get. I was standing in the back of the classroom when I took that picture. So there are, I think, 13 kids in that class, and that's actually one of the smaller class sizes that they had. A lot of their classes are actually at capacity. They try to keep it around 20 students. And that room used to be a janitorial storage closet that they converted into a classroom because there just isn't enough space to accommodate the needs of their student body. But I mean, you walk into the classroom and it feels like a classroom, which is cool. This classroom is the 4th grade classroom, and it actually isn't really a room so much as a fellowship hall that's been converted into a classroom. It's hard to see from this picture, but there's wheeled partitions that come and sort of like surround the room. But there's constantly, like where I took this picture from, we were standing in a hallway, so there's constantly upperclassmen walking past the classroom because it's right in the middle of the hallway. That classroom is. So in terms of growth, a lot of what they're looking at is expanding their school so that they can have more space to accommodate more kids. And the enrollment it sounded like it would most likely be there because there's plenty of interest from the surrounding community and the families that are already involved. And a lot of classrooms are already at capacity, and sometimes they even bump up the enrollment numbers per class if there's just like 1 or 2 more kids that they can squeeze in. So some of the class sizes are even above 20. Yeah.
They use a variety of methods to communicate. They have website, they do emails, they have the fast, direct text messages, and they print. This was a picture of a printed advertisement for their annual Thanksgiving dinner. But the curious thing is that the most effective is word of mouth. So it's relational. That's about all I will. Oh, their school newsletter is called Reaching Up, Reaching Out, and in that is where they share stories about what God's doing, the needs of the school, students and their families.
And as Ward was talking about on one of our first slides, being situated in South Minneapolis, they have like tremendous diversity at their school, but the vast majority of their students are African or African American by descent, and 85% of their student body qualifies for free or reduced lunches. But they also have large populations of Hmong, Latino, and Caucasian students as well, among others. They have some Native American. And what I found interesting when we were talking to Anna is I asked her if the demographics change at all from year to year, as in do these percentages of students change drastically, but over the years she said they've remained relatively steady. So there's usually a higher percentage of African and African American students, and then filled in with other ethnic groups as well in the smaller percentages. But the demographics have stayed pretty steady over the last few years. Most of the teachers that work at Trinity First and most of the staff are of European descent, though not all of them, which is kind of interesting. But the most important thing they said they look at during the teacher interview process is not necessarily what their background is, but that they have a passion and the capability to work with a multicultural group of students, which can be really, really challenging when you have kids that come from households with different expectations than some of the other students. Yeah. Okay, I think that's what I have for that. And in terms of theology and prayer, as Janet and Ward were talking about, Trinity First Lutheran School was based originally on the Lutheran faith, and it started out or the Lutheran denomination, and it started out as the congregation coming to the pastor and saying, we want a school for our kids. But it sort of evolved into something really a lot bigger than that in a lot of ways. So they welcome all types of students to their school, which is very unique, especially among parochial and other Christian schools. They don't care if their students have a Christian background or not, but they see their school as a mission field to reach the kids in the community and the families in the community that is around them, which is really, really cool, I think. Faith is not relegated only to a Bible class either. They do require that their teachers live out their faith and model it to their students and integrate it into all subject areas so that their kids are not just seeing faith, the Christian faith, as something that is theological or simply a Bible class. It's something that permeates all of who you are, which is pretty cool. they also make a point, as Janet was saying and as Ward was saying, to pray about everything. Their mission is very much focused on prayer, and they rely on God for a lot of their funding and for a lot of the decisions, or all of the decisions that they make. And one thing that I thought was cool that illustrates the faith integration is that every day at the end of the day, the whole student body and all the staff end up in the fellowship hall of the church, and they end each day by singing songs together and praying together before they're all dismissed, which was pretty cool. So they end each day as a community focused on Christ, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Did you have something you want to say to this? Ward, to finish us off.
Yeah, I think just one thing, it's not only in terms of caring for students in terms of some of their cultural and family dynamics, but even in terms of their learning situation. And my kids have got dyslexia, we got a little ADD going on, and they talked about that they can identify in the classroom if a child has a learning difference. And they can immediately, because they don't accept government funding and so forth, they've got special ed, I don't know what they call it, the tree house, where they can, a teacher can identify it, and they go to the tree house, which is actually kind of a cool place, that then they've talked about some of the strategies they have, and they can get kids some of the adaptations and training that they need right away without having to wait. So I think that just shows some of the care and concern that they demonstrate for their students. And I think you can kind of look at these pictures here, this full classroom, and it's dynamic, and the students are paying attention. You got, multi-sensory learning up here where they're engaged, and then you got this rainbow, in the midst of, some of the chaos in the midst of the city context. You got this school right in the middle of it, where there's God is bringing peace in the midst of it. So, any questions?
What do they do with helping care for people with PTSD, the kids with PTSD or different mental health issues? Do they want support for that?
I'll let Janet answer.
I don't know. I don't remember that she said anything specifically other than what we just said, special needs, and because of their Christian faith, they would be, you have love and care and prayer for that child. Do you remember hearing anything?
I didn't have any specifics either.
I don't think. Any other questions, Mike? Yeah. Yes. 150, yeah.
How long have they looked the way they look now? Like you said, it was different. Did it start to be this with the current principal, or did they have that model for a while?
It was before the current principal. So I want to say it was back in the 70s or the 80s, the 1970s or 80s, that it started expanding outside the church and becoming more of a mission. I'm sure I have the exact date somewhere in my notebook, but yep.
Sarah Whippick is one of the most tremendous leaders in this country. To be mentored by her, if someone, would be fabulous, and tremendous ministry.
Yeah.
What impressed me is that she said she was a single mom with parents, and then she became a teacher, and now she's the principal of the school. So that's how committed she is to the school and its ministry.
Very good, thank you. Nicely done. You guys all brought good reports about this. What do you see as the greatest vulnerability in that ministry? What's the greatest point of danger in that ministry? I'd say that's number 2. They're very tenuous in their funding. Anybody got any ideas as to where that whole ministry could be wiped out very easily and quickly?
I wonder if like culture wars and the social environment would have an impact on how they're. I'm thinking off the top of my head. It could be something that would create
Well, they're all going to have interesting things, yeah.
Could create like a social firestorm that would really negatively affect them.
Is that what I have in mind?
Possibly state laws and regulations.
You guys are thinking too big. No,
What
that
if
could be
Sarah
possible.
left?
What if Sarah gets hit by a bus?
She
is a
did
king.
mention that though, like that she's tried to take a step back from a lot of things because they rely on her in so many different areas, and for a while, like even now, she said that parents will call asking for her, and then she'll have to redirect them to the appropriate office so that she isn't doing everything, so that the ministry can continue after she retires or after she leaves or whatever.
And I've been believing that whole group that she's working with, that's a tremendous step in the right direction. But that's the kind of thing that the devil just loves to throw a monkey wrench in. We used to have discussions about what would happen to MissionShift in U4C if Raleigh gets hit by a truck. Well, then I got hit by a truck. totaled my Forerunner, my old Forerunner. So I went to the next meeting and somebody said, well, what happens if Raleigh gets hit by a bus? I said, now stop it. But that's a consideration, Would the ministry have to end? Would it, et cetera. Okay, next presentation. Good job, guys. Very nice. Who's up to bat? Let's not all talk at once here.
Your 3 pages.
So many windows. Like we have like whole walls that are windows. But also,
Okay.
the other thing about the building was that there's no air conditioning in it, so they've
Okay.
had like heat
Okay.
days. Like we've had cold days where you can't go to school because it's so cold. They've had heat days in like August and end of May just because the students can't safely sit in the classrooms.
Brenda has taught in a summer session in St. Paul schools with windows that open this big and with fans and the room temperature being over 105.
Okay, we visited Jesus in the City Fellowship, not the actual place, but we met with Kristen Hurt, who is the only person that's on the board of directors, but that's who we met with. We did not meet at the church where they, we did not meet at the church because the church had no heat, so we kind of met in her apartment building. So the ministry was founded by Pastor Pila. He was a jeweler, and in 1996 he was going to Bible school and seminary. And she doesn't know the story, and I don't either, of the connection between MissionShift.
He was in the very first class.
Oh, he was, okay. And then there's some connection with St. Paul's and North Heights.
He went to a Bible school that was at North Heights called Way Ministry Training Center. He also took this class simultaneously with one of the years of that.
Okay.
And then their church began on Friday nights here.
Oh. So I asked Kristen about it, and she didn't know the story, and I didn't talk to Pastor Pila. So anyways, in 1996, he was studying Isaiah 58, and these verses really spoke to him, and that's where he felt the call to start an inner city ministry in South Minneapolis. The church is actually near Minnehaha Avenue and Lake Street, and it's owned by a Native American group. There's kind of a long story. They rent the building. They'd be willing to purchase the building, but there's some deeds that have been lost, and it would cost too much money to go through court to get the deeds. So they're just renting, and they share the church with a Hispanic fellowship that meets in the afternoons. They truly are a mission church, meaning they raise all their funds on the outside in order to minister on the inside to people. And Kristen Hurt, who we talked to, she really felt that his greatest founding gift is tenacity, that he does whatever the Lord tells him to do, no matter what the obstacles. And he's very passionate about ministry, teaching, preaching. We're very creative in fundraising and networking. And so that's kind of the introduction part of it all. And why they exist, they have a host of ministries that they're involved with. They are there to serve South Minneapolis, and they really focus on the homeless, the poor, mentally ill, and those that are suffering from addiction. She said that she personally is most proud of the congregation. It's a very small congregation. I went there to church, and it was maybe 25 people there, and maybe 50 on a really good day. But she said it's only about 24 that do all the ministering. So from this very small congregation, there's a very strong core that minister. And you don't really go there without knowing what area you're going to minister. You don't just go there to sit in the pews on Sunday and come back the next Sunday. She said there's really very, very little dissension because everybody's very, very busy ministering. The Christmas in the City is a ministry that they're involved with at this time of the year, where they partner with Bachman's, who provides a free tree, and then they work with other churches and other businesses who provide food and gifts, and then deliver that to the families. And that's one way of reaching out to their community. The tent ministry is kind of run by, her name is Wendy Locke, I think is L-O-C-K-E is how you say her name. She is a deacon in the church, and she comes from a reservation in Sisseton, South Dakota, and she really feels her mission is to carry the message of the gospel to all people and cultures. And so she goes down to the tent city and does ministry there. One of the largest ministries is Metro Hope and Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. They provide, and a huge part of their ministry too is mentors. Mentors are involved with going out to Teen Challenge as well as the Metro Hope. And they conduct Bible studies there and chapel services. And which brings me to the People of Hope Praise Team. And Kristen Hurt is the director of that. And in there is Pastor Llewellyn, who came and spoke to us when he came. He's one of the pastors there. But they go regularly out to prisons, to block parties, to Metro Hope, as well as Teen Challenge, really wherever they're invited and do ministry. Fishing for Life is another ministry. It's really a time for urban and suburban pastors to get together, and they go fishing on White Bear Lake, and they have a huge bunch that go. And I think a lot of it is to raise support for the ministries, as well as to communicate the needs of the inner city with maybe suburban pastors. And then Pastor Pila is also involved with the Urban Ministry Theology Institute, where he wants to train the next generation of leaders. They have studies such as in Nehemiah and Romans. There's also a financial restoration conference and women's conferences they're involved with, trying to help get individuals and families out of poverty. The leadership is the next one. And you see Wendy Lack, she's the deacon. Chrissy Hurt is the board of directors herself. And then Pastor Boyer and Dickerson are both involved with mentoring. And then Lonnie Van Meteren, he's the building manager. And none of those people there are paid. They're all volunteers. And the only paid staff is Pastor Llewellyn and Pastor Pila, and they get a monthly stipend. They are under a synod-type organization called International Ministerial Fellowship. It's a body of non-denominational Christians that provide ministry support. And Chrissy said that Pastor Pila pretty much makes most of the decisions. Anything that that involves money, he'll run by her, any financial decisions. But then he does consult the people that are involved in a particular ministry. If there's a decision to be made, he doesn't just make it all by himself, but he does just then check with those people. But it's a pretty small group of leaders that are all volunteers for the most part. And then growth is the next area. And she kind of proudly said that they have absolutely no strategy for growth. They feel the Lord will grow their work and will bring it to them. And they pray the prayer of Jabez, which they just pray for the Lord to enlarge their territory. One new ministry that seems to be on their doorstep is working with Native Americans. In the Native American ministry, there is a house church, God's Royal Family in North Minneapolis, that's run by the lady in pink there, Mrs. Beaver. She's 85 years old, and she doesn't think she's probably going to be able to maintain that ministry for much longer. So they're trying, Jesus in the City is trying to support her by, Pastor Pila goes out to their church and preaches, and they provide worship with them. They're trying to really make a lot of connections. So in hopes that that church would bring their people to Jesus in the City Fellowship, that they could support them there.
So yeah, their focus is inner city community, addiction recovery and prison ministry, and then they also have the focus of the Christmas and I forgot what it's called, the Christmas in the City, where they like provide, people will come and support a family and provide presents for the family who can't afford presents, and then also a Christmas tree and food and stuff for Christmas. And then the top picture is, so the bottom picture is a family that received a Christmas tree and Christmas presents and stuff. And then the top picture is the banquet, question mark. It's a barbecue. What was the barbecue for? I don't remember. Oh, it's for fun. Okay. So yeah, they also, I'm drawing a blank. They also have a music ministry that's super cool that, sort of is from like branched out of their church, but also it's kind of just like other people that don't necessarily go to Jesus in the City, but Chrissy is the director of it, and they go and like do opening acts for Mercy Me, and I can't remember what other bands they opened for, but they opened for some pretty big Christian names, and they're like a gospel singer. They remake songs and they rewrite secular songs and sing them in Christian. Yeah. So their funds, basically, she didn't talk very much about the funds, but she did say that basically all of their funds are from donors. They have some donors and then individual givers randomly, but most of it is literally just trusting that God's going to provide, and so far He's done so abundantly. And so, yeah, and she actually, I spoke with her for 2 hours after Mary Beth and Jonathan left. She reeled me into being their official fundraiser, sort of. So next semester, I'm going to be traveling to churches and fundraising for them, so that's cool. But yeah, so they didn't have a fundraiser person. really the pastor kind of was taking that load, and so they they just kind of needed that, and so here I am. But they also they just rely on God's support, or God's provision for them, for their support. Their main is this I'm still talking? Okay. Their main communication is via print and email, and then sometimes they have radio ads. They do have a website. However, it's made by also the pastor, who does everything for them. So there's a lot of spelling errors and situations going on because he's not a professional, but he also handles everything, so he can't do everything perfectly. So Pastor Pila runs a lot of communication, fundraising, preaching, literally everything. And so, that's their main communication. They haven't branched out farther than that, really, because of funding and stuff they can't afford to.
So, they're very mixed. There's a lot of African Americans, there's some white people, there's a lot of Native Americans, but it does seem to be a primarily Native American ministries. It's inner city, but Native Americans are the only culture that they've specifically targeted. But they celebrate the differences that there are in these different cultures that all come together in this church. Kristen made this point that she doesn't believe in color blindness, which is that everyone is the same, but that we should recognize the differences and appreciate them, and then we can learn from them and be better. And so for us to be colorblind, or to see everyone the same, is to ignore those differences and ignore all the color that there is to these different cultures. Their theology, they have very loose planning. They follow the Spirit very closely. They seem to have this idea that God has His own plans, and so we should listen to God first before we make decisions, or before we make like major moves in ministry. And so the way she said it was that a lot of the time what we do in ministry is we just go for it, and then we ask and expect God to bless it without listening to Him first and seeing what He wants to do. So their ministry is built around just like listening to God and kind of going with what they feel the Spirit is leading them into. Their model is based on Isaiah 58, as Mary Beth talked about. And Isaiah 58, it talks about what pleases God isn't just like piety, but reaching the poor and giving food to the hungry. And it says like spending yourself, fulfilling the needs of the oppressed. And that's what pleases God. They are non-denominational. They're part of International Ministerial Fellowship. And IMF, their theology, they have a statement of faith on their website. And that statement of faith is pretty broad, but a few things that they do stand for is they are not cessationists. They do believe in the Holy Spirit and the gifts, and they do take a stand against homosexuality and against transgender movements. So those are two things that they do stand for in their theology. But other than that, they're non-denominational and accept a lot of different denominations. Their ministry was founded on prayer, and they pray a lot, and they pray all the time about a lot of things. They have prayer chains and groups that meet over the phone. And whenever things come up, and they have like prayer projects that when issues come up, they'll pray for this project until it's resolved. And so, in conclusion, what makes this ministry unique is kind of how flexible they are, and they don't seem to have like a long-term plan, when somebody comes in, basically everyone that works with this ministry is already trained to do what they do. And when someone comes in that knows how to do one thing, then they add another ministry to use the gifts of the people that come in. And basically, everyone who goes to this church is part of some ministry. Everyone has a role. Everybody does something. Nobody comes in and just sits in the pews. It's a very active church. And it is very culturally mixed. There's a lot of cultures that come together, but they seem to work together very well. There's no, as Mary Beth was saying, there's no like collision or anything that happens. Everybody is a family there, and you can feel it, as Mary Beth talked about. When you come in, it feels like family. Everyone welcomes you, and yeah. Any questions?
Where's their greatest point of vulnerability?
I think that they don't really plan anything, and then things get kind of like disorganized, and then it doesn't seem like there's very much structure, and so they need more structure. And then there was kind of an issue with the music ministry, apparently, that they needed the music pastor to come in and then add some structure to that ministry.
What about in their leadership?
Their leadership. What was the question again?
What's the vulnerability there, do you see in the leadership?
Oh yeah, kind of the same thing. It seems like Pastor Bila does everything in leadership. Everybody that's chosen is chosen by Pastor Bila for leadership. And so it seems like if he got hit by a bus, there may not be, I mean, maybe they could find somebody quickly, but they would need somebody to fill that role pretty quickly, or else it seems the ministry would fall apart.
Why might the flexibility be good in an urban setting?
Because things change a lot, I guess. There's a lot of different needs that are in the city, and not necessarily one thing. Because it does seem that all of the ministries that they do are useful, and there wasn't really anyone else doing it before then. And so, yeah, it seems like there's a lot of things that are needed that are very specific in the city.
Good, thank you. All right, we have one more. Good job, guys, very good. I think everything you say is very accurate.
So I don't have the visual part of the presentation, but I'm just going to work off of an outline that I made up based off our paper. Aaron, Rigo, and I attempted to meet with Chris the first time, and then ended up just being me and Rigo the second time because of a logistical issue. So myself and Rigo sat down with Chris. I can't remember if it's Castillo or Gastillo. Castillo? Okay. Salts, and specifically my presentation is mostly based off of, obviously a little bit loosely, the background we got from Mike coming and talking to us as a class, but as well as mostly what we wrote our paper on is Chris's personal take on SALT, and what we found is it's fairly flexible and it's kind of personalized. And so Chris is a site leader, volunteer here in South Minneapolis, and what we've discovered is that it's fairly just kind of what we've been learning about these, the weaknesses in weaknesses in these nonprofit ministries is really it can be vulnerable at times, and I think the biggest vulnerability is that we've kind of found this night is that leadership can come and go, leadership can kind of flicker, but we've found really that like the skeleton and like the backbone of this ministry has been Chris at this one site. And like you guys learned, we all learned from Mike, is that it's a very broad ministry. They have like they have families who are waiting for volunteers and tutors in locations like in St. Paul and at the Bethlehem Baptist site. But at other places it's kind of different. At some different locations, SALT will take place in a Somali family's home. It might be in at a church or at an independent community center. And so Chris runs a classroom style. It sometimes is more individualized, more one-on-one, small groups, but it's essentially a group of Somali men and women that live in an apartment building complex right here off of, I believe is it Portland and 24th Avenue? Portland and 24th? Oh, 5th. In Portland? Okay. Okay. And he described the apartments as like the big horns or whatever, the two horns apartments. That way? Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, Portland goes that way. And so basically they meet on the first floor of the apartment complex 3 times weekly is what I got. And he has had a huge major leadership role in the fact that his small slice of SALT is very specific to basically his desires and his freedoms. SALT gives him a lot of liberty and a lot of space to be creative, and he's found that he really enjoys the teaching part and that it's kind of a gift for him. I think it's a gift. I mean, I don't know if I could do what he does every 3 times weekly, and he's gone on to do some further schooling and look into different jobs professionally because he doesn't get paid for this, what he does. So he has given up part of his role. I believe he's twice a week now, and he has brought in other volunteers to assist him in the teaching. But it's pretty fluid as far as week to week. He tries to provide refreshments, whether it be coffee. He's tried to fine-tune his coffee recipe to the way that the families in that building like it. And what I found out is that for I believe it's 3+ years that he's been at this site, it's a pretty much exclusively elderly housing facility, senior living center. Not that they're disabled or in a nursing home per se, but they're generally in their older latter part of their life. And especially the people that are coming here are more traditional, and a lot of times when they came here from Somalia, they had very limited literacy even back home. And so to establish this literacy, which is their mission here in Minnesota and in the United States in general, is really a challenge. And so I'd say one of his biggest roadblocks is that there are him and a few volunteers with a class of anywhere from 5 to 12 people a night, and just trying to meet every person where they're at, because if all of us learned a language together and were transplanted into a country in Africa or Southeast Asia, we would all pick up the language at very different levels. And he said some people can converse with him and come up to him and be very dynamic and very confrontational and use their English language skills to really, be conversational with him and have a dialogue. And at other times, it's almost as if people come to his class and as a social outlet, and will be social with other people who are their neighbors, and they are interested in the Western culture, but are kind of hardened to some of the things that he tries to introduce. And so, not specifically Arrive Ministries, which is the parent organization of SALT, but his personal take on SALT is kind of the way that I framed our paper, is that he has to almost, I wouldn't say he hides the gospel. If he's ever confronted with an apologetic issue or a theological question or a parable or an Old Testament story, he's very bold in his faith that way, but at the same time he understands his target, and Somali people are naturally hostile towards the gospel. If you were to come in and just write John 3:16 on the board, and then this is our English lesson for tonight, and then almost like you're not teaching English, but you were just trying to, throw this gospel down their throats, essentially, that would come across very negative towards them, and he would find himself getting into a shouting match. And something that Chris told us is that Somali people are very apologetically versed. They know they've been schooled in their mosques and in their religious communities, and they know how to debate him. And so he's found throughout his years being the primary site leader, he's found that he has to come with a posture of love and listening and wanting to enrich these people's lives, no matter how despondent, if they sit in the back row and don't say anything for week after week. He still has to, present himself as a loving Christian, as a Westerner to them. He does have Filipino heritage, but to them, he represents America and Minnesota and the Twin Cities. And so I think he does a really good job of just being that person who they can rely on, because no matter how negative or hostile they might, present themselves to him, I feel like they keep coming back because Chris and his volunteers are so loving and so giving and in their donation of their time and resources. So that comes to funding and SALT. I didn't really get into how the money trickles down as far as Rive Ministries goes and Mike's role in that. But essentially, it's very simplistic, just like the rest of Chris's model, is that he donates all of his time, and he's unpaid, and they have to be very giving and selfless in their time and in their resources. He found that he was given some very, he uses the curriculum and resources that he was given originally. He uses them when he needs to, but he's kind of developed his own lesson plans and decide for himself what works and what doesn't. So as far as the resources that he's given, it's very self-initiated, and he described it to me as out of pocket. So I would say the ways that Chris meets the needs of the people, just in that, is that it's very needs-based, and that people who come here, just like we've learned every week during MissionShift Institute this fall, is that when people are new to the Twin Cities or to this country, language is just a barrier that people continue to try to get over, and myself trying to attempt to learn a second language in my education, which has been high school and college, so more of a formalized education system, but for someone just to be uprooted and planted here in more of a traumatic fashion, whether they liked it or not, and they find themselves here, I think that learning a language is just such a what do you call that when you can't get over the same. It's such a milestone for people when they can finally master a language, and I think that's really a determiner of success. And Chris really communicated to us, to Rigo and I, that basically the primary issue is that just discerning when are people there for social outlet, and when are people there to just be there with their friends and with their neighbors, and then when were they there actually to learn. And so I feel like as far as the tripart model that we've been discussing in class, it leans towards the needs-based, and yet I think the posture that he presents himself to these the Somali residents in this building is very loving, and that is the gospel right there. And the third one being relationships is, I'd say, equal part with needs-based, because essentially I don't think people, or he wouldn't ever get through to someone so differently and with such a different culture, kind of like the message that we got from Mike that one night. You could see a lot of passion in Mike, and then he had a lot of love, and I feel like that's something that Chris had, is just a calling to continue to be relational with people and to continue to keep giving of himself even when he didn't have a lot to give. And it'll be interesting to see how this specific site continues to go on. He's wanting to get a he's finishing his formal education in education, actually, and wants to get a teaching job. And so I'm sure that SALT, specifically at this location that Chris works at, could use our thoughts and prayers as the people continue to rely on his gospel message. So any questions on SALT in South Minneapolis? Mike?
Yeah, Chris, how many other sites are there?
He described it as being, he knew so little. It seemed to be he was almost like a he was so into his like one, I would say, pocket ministry, that he considered, yeah, he was a part of Mike's, when I described the presentation that Mike gave to us, like about the ministries in people's homes, tutoring their kids and their homework and their language in people's homes in Plymouth, and as far as Cottage Grove and St. Paul, on all sides of the cities up in Fridley, he seemed to know that, but to not really be connected. And so the wide network of SALT is, like I said in the beginning, it's very individualized. Essentially, if you wanted to come to Mike and present your case for, I like what you're doing here and I want to see where I can be helpful, he might tell you that, hey, we need tutors in this part of the Twin Cities. Are you willing to go into this townhome or apartment complex and be with this family or these children? Or maybe if you were to be able to present your case to him of where you feel like there's a need, he would allow you to start your own. And I'm not exactly sure if someone was in this building before Chris or if he took it over for someone, but I do know that it's very, like if Chris were to stop going every week, yeah, there would still be other volunteers there, but he puts a lot of the work into it, and he's the site coordinator there, and it's, like I said, it's 100% volunteer of his time and his money, so.
There's about 15 other sites.
Oh, official sites?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little bit hard to count because like there might be people, there's other sites where there's maybe one person with this small.
Okay.
But there's about 15 sites where there's several people.
Okay, so the kind of the similar, I guess, format that Chris is using as far as reaching a number of, in a geographical area. So it sounds like about 15 different locations around the Twin Cities. But Chris donates his time to the one here in South Minneapolis, and it was really a testament to see like what kind of impact you can have. And I think really the vast cultural differences that he encounters. And, he talked about having people would come to class and they would just want to like pick fights with him. They would get in his face, or maybe people would one of his volunteers would get a little more intimidated and kind of like, oh, I didn't like how this one gentleman, approached me last week. But he's able to always cross those boundaries with the love that he has for teaching people and trying to connect with them and showing them God's love. So, any other questions? Bueller? Okay.
Well, there were only white families in America then. I'm kidding, I'm kidding. Well, we were establishing our identity again after the Great Depression and the war. And so that was the way they did it.
There's probably only white people in appliance commercials on TV.
When black people started showing up in commercials in the late 60s, early 70s, or first television shows that would have one black character, I was like, you know, whoa, it was so shocking. It's incomprehensible today. But you know, even watch the original Star Trek. You had one Russian, you had one Asian, and you had one African American. All right, let's get this started parted. Okay, I want you to quickly write down 2 things you learned from these presentations about starting or running a ministry that surprised you or you didn't think of before. And just do it quickly. Did you hear my assignment? Why don't you have paper out then? Your assignment was write down 2 things that you learned about starting or running a ministry. You have seconds to do this, so. Do 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 do. Final Jeopardy. Oh. You need a pen? Well, I had one. I lost it. There's one over there. You know, I owned one a long, long time ago. I do own a slide rule. In fact, I own 2 slide rules. Pocket breakers don't last very long, especially in cold weather. What did you learn new tonight about starting or maintaining a ministry? What are you taking home from this? Jesus in the City started out as an absolute baby ministry with nothing. Jericho Road, you had 2 of the most gifted, knowledgeable people in that area in the Twin Cities. If I have a question about where to get help, there's nobody else I call. And I have tremendous respect for them. You've got 159 years of development behind Trinity First, and yet they hang on by a shoestring. And Salt, again, started with nothing. We offered them free office space back, I don't know, 15 years ago, or how long ago did they start? And that has grown. It's another ministry that's very vulnerable if Mike Niederer gets hit by a bus. We've got to pray for these people, because these people do get hit by buses or trucks. Okay, who wants to share something? Yep.
What you guys saw is most of them started by heart, by vision.
Okay. Okay. It starts with people who have a heart and a vision. Yeah. Good. We usually say where there's a Bible verse, where there's no vision, the people perish. We usually say where there's no vision, it's a Lutheran parish. All right. Good. Very good. Who else got to share?
I just took note that multiplying leadership was always very, very difficult, because oftentimes you can't reproduce the personality of the person. And disciple making is is just, yeah, generational leadership is lacking in all four of these, it seems.
Yeah, Anna Van Vliet, I think, has got the gifts to take over someday if she were to feel called at Trinity First. And they're probably the furthest ahead on that in any of these. But this is also why we need to train you guys, to understand the entrepreneurial task. We need to turn you loose, because you guys can all build something. It doesn't have to be $1 million a year. Just a little free time, and notice something, and grab a couple friends and say, hey, let's do this. Who else got something? You've all got something, come on. Yes, you've got your hand up first. All right.
Well, I was just thinking how important it is to balance flexibility and planning, because I think probably most of these ministries probably lean on the flexible side, which is actually probably in some ways a strength of because they're ministering to a new city, but also there needs to be a structure and plan. So somehow finding that sweet spot in the middle.
And maybe having plan B and plan C in the back of your head, but knowing when to do that. It's kind of like walking through the woods, and I want to go over there, and I know the spot, and I can see a tree way out there, or I know the direction, and I line up 3 trees, and I walk to the first one, and then I get another tree beyond that, and I can stay in line. Sometimes I got to walk around blackberry bushes, and sometimes I got to walk around swamps, but I can if I keep my eye on where I'm going, I'll get there. But that's the challenge, is to know when to change direction. And a lot of people make the mistake of changing direction too soon, going through life kind of like a styrofoam hockey puck.
This is sort of similar to what others have said, but I wrote successful. All 4 of these ministries hit those 3 categories that we talked about, and I was most stricken by how they each meet a real need of the community that surrounds them.
Yep. Okay, and you can get to any of the 3 from any of the other. You can start in any of the 3. So in fact, if you're going to work with a new group, you probably want to start a relationship so that you can learn what their real need is, and that's probably inside the onion, way down. Okay, who else is next? Yeah.
Surrounded by prayer.
Surrounded by prayer. Talk about that.
I mean, just that it's not about humans deciding to do something where they're going to do it on their own power. They really rely on the power of the Holy Spirit to minister, to actually meet the need. And they could do some physical work, but for the ministry really to flourish, the Lord has to have his hand in it.
Having intercessors behind you and around you in real time is extremely important. And God will provide you with those people, but don't lack putting that together. That's so critical. Okay? Here, can we throw the mic over to some of the other people here?
I had a similar observation as Mike, just in terms of leaders who can organize and kind of launch something are not always those that can build or sustain something kind of beyond themselves. And so, thinking through, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you are wanting to see something sustained, you need to have an eye on that pretty early in the organization, I think, versus kind of waiting until it's too late or it's really urgent.
And that's where the entrepreneur, the messy, sloppy, broad-thinking entrepreneur, a lot of false starts and so forth, needs especially the ESTJ, who is the middle management person who comes in and trims off all the fat and says, we need to do this, and makes it happen. ESTJ, big-time manager. Yeah. Okay. And then one of the hardest things in a ministry is to move from that entrepreneurial stage. It's some of these places like Google and so forth, where they were able to turn the corner from the entrepreneur thing to the point where it was a large company. That's an amazing thing that they could turn that corner, because the gifts are so different. It's like, there's a lot of congregations that get up to $299 in incised on a given morning, and they tend to shatter and then go down, and they'll go up and down maybe every 5 years, and they'll never break that 299. When they get past 299, they become a whole different kind of organism, and they don't have two different power centers, which is what you typically have when you're at the 299 point. Two different power centers develop in the congregation, and the kind of pastor you need at each of those levels is a different kind of pastor. And up to that 299, everybody relates to the pastor. You get past that point, and people relate to a church and a staff. And that's a real challenge. Very hard corner to make, and it takes real ministry gifts to know how to turn that corner. Yeah.
I just have, it just says be bold and don't be afraid to work with God's provision, and obviously that partners with prayer. Yeah. And then just, it seems like, yeah, obviously the importance of strong leadership and a diversified leadership. Like I remember going to the Marie Sandvik Center, and I can't remember who owns or funds that. He's an ex-Vikings player, but from the 80s, I can't remember. But it just seemed like, once again, you had somebody who kind of like, everyone was asking him the questions. He was back in the kitchen with us, making the food. It was hot, you know. He was also setting up the chairs. He was also welcoming people. So it was almost like he was the face and the hands and feet and everything else. And so just like how to transmit that onto a bold group of volunteers and try to empower people, just to support you so it can be sustaining.
Got a cartoon up, well, I had it, was up in my office. I guess it's someplace in my garage now in one of the 75 boxes. But it was a flow chart before Moses in the 72. So it was Moses, direction here, Moses, water provision, Moses, manna, Moses, entertainment, Moses. You know, and there were about 70 different things, and it was all Moses. Every one of the flow chart was, and sometimes in small ministries it's a lot like that. And to be able to turn other people loose and equip them is yet another challenge. But each of these points, you don't have to have 47 people. You can have a very valid ministry with 1 or 2 people that know what they're doing, and they just want to get it done. They don't have to worry about any of the incorporation. They don't have to worry about insurance. Just go do it. Word.
I think one of the things is, it's been alluded to already, is in the face of adversity, the commitment of the people, of the leaders, to press on in the midst of trials. Yeah, I recall a recent conversation with an African American friend of mine and say, hey, what do you see my role in this? And he said, well, you just count the cost. I was kind of like, well, I was expecting something like, hey, I see you have this. It's like, you just count the cost and then decide what you're going to do, and then you just kind of stick to it.
Yeah, for a pastor to be in the inner city, at least in the Lutheran denomination, it's kind of like, dead end. It's kind of like the dead letter box. You end up there for all sorts of reasons I can go into, but people don't want to go there. And anyway, whatever, we can talk more about that at some point. But I'd never planned to go to the city, but it was a perfect fit.
Another quick thing that I noticed, a lot of them were partnering well with other organizations. So Jesus in the City, the band went to all these different places. Jericho Road knew of other resources for relief and help. And they weren't saying, we're going to take care of everything.
Right.
We'll do our part and get out to every other place.
Yeah.
I found it interesting that a lot of the pastors, a lot of the leaders were doing something else before they came up with the ministry that they had. And so you don't have to start off in the kind of ministry that you want to do. You can switch gears, and it's okay to change from the kind of path you're on to do the ministry that you feel that needs to be done.
Back when they still had honest jobs. Anyway, well, sometimes you covered with wheelbarrow, you find yourself spit out in very interesting places, and sometimes there's no wheelbarrow. Okay.
Well, it's almost like you've got to be going in a direction first. You've got to have some momentum before you can make course corrections to where God has you.
And you may wonder, why in the world have I learned all these crazy things, and then all of a sudden it all comes together?
Yeah.
That's one thing I found over the years. Did you have some comments?
I can, yeah. What I noticed in all four of them was that I noticed the weakness was the same, in that it was just one lead, focus on just one leader. And so what I'm wondering is if God lays a burden on your heart, look for other people that can become your leadership team. Make sure they have different strengths and weaknesses so that it's not just one person.
Develop them, grow them, teach them, disciple
We'll
them.
start together, if possible.
Yeah.
And then you prioritize your focus and pray a lot.
And train people how to keep it going. When I left my church in southern Minnesota, 1985, I had spent 6 years of my life training them. They had no committee, no budget. They had never had a choir. We left them with a 58-voice kiddie choir and a senior choir, and it's all still running. Since 85 to now is what? Almost 35 years, right? 85, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's so it's but I was careful not only to build the stuff, which I was fortunate to have worked in a very well organized church and understood how to put things together, because that's kind of what I do. But it's really easy to build something and then walk away from it and it falls apart. The trick is to build it and set it so that it's sustaining itself with people who know how to run it, so they can take it if you get hit by a truck. And that's one of the things I see as a danger in some of these areas. And it's a lot easier not to do that, just to remain the grand poobah. But if you again, the ministry is, if the ministry doesn't continue beyond you, well, maybe that's God's will, but I think it's kind of like, if you got a choice of planting a perennial or planting an annual, you're probably better off planting the perennial. But. All right, now, next week we come back here. I'm going to finish up entrepreneuring the church. I kind of moved some things around a little bit on you. And we will have our Christmas party. We'll have some more treats, and you guys also ask you to please bring a little Christmas tree of some sort. And we may have a drawing for a brand new Mercedes-Benz. We may not. But anyway, but come, we have some various things that we're going to talk about. And then we finish this section up, and for those of you who are taking this for credit at the colleges, the semester is done after next week, and we'll get your grades in and all that stuff. Now, yes?
I don't have a place to live, like, this weekend, because it's done on the 15th, like, the semester.
Okay.
So, like, because the dorms close over Christmas break. So, like, do you, like, I could figure it out, but, because I like more people in the cities, but, like, as of right now, I, like, don't. So, is that a requirement, like, for me, or I'm supposed to work at home on Monday?
You can pick it up online.
Online, okay,
Yeah,
and
that'd be
then
fine.
count.
But you won't get all the goodies.
That's okay.
You have to drop off your cookies, so. I'm kidding.
No, okay, sounds good.
Yeah, do what you have to do. Now, when we have Christmas break, and then the semester actually continues for 3 more weeks. And the next unit is on world religions. And we're going to be looking at Islam, we're going to be looking at Buddhism, we're going to be looking at Hinduism, are the main ones. May touch on the Chinese religions a little bit. If you haven't had a class in that, those of you who go to Northwestern, and I don't know if you guys have that as a required class at Applebus. World religions?
Our Calvinism class that's closed, but.
Okay. Well, it's the people that teach us that really know their stuff, and they're really good. And that's the last 3 weeks of the semester. So it's kind of optional, but in January, yeah, the first 3 weeks in January, we start whatever that first Monday is. And it's really interesting, it's really good, and you can invite friends to be a part of that as well. There's no cost. So you can... Monday nights, yeah, just all the same. It's just the same normal thing, and devos and treats and so forth, except that we'll have guest speakers, or we will have speakers, but some of our college students might not be with us because they're on break. Okay, but most of you guys will be here. And that finishes up that semester. Then the last Monday in January, we will have finished setting the table, and then begins the feast. So then the second semester, having learned when we finish up with entrepreneuring the church, having gone out and seen these ministries and having learned about how ministry works a little bit, then we're going to have a chunk on fundraising, and we're going to spend the entire spring semester, a little bit of time each week, figuring out how we can reach. Each group, we're going to have small groups, 3 or 4 people, that will each create a plan to reach an unreached people group. And we've got some new people groups. We've got some people from Sudan. We've got some people. We've got Kaching. We've got people who have come here from Syria. We've got people. We've got some groups that have been here for quite a while and are unreached as well. So I'll pick a few of those, and then you guys can sign up for one of those groups. And then we teach you a whole system that through the second semester you will get to study these people, and then get to talk to people who are already doing ministry with them, and then go out and meet them now that you know something, and then create the last 3 or 4 weeks a plan to reach these unreached people groups, starting with no money, starting with no resources, where you're going to get what you need for resources, what the access point is. I'm going to talk about the access point next week, and how God has prepared them for you to bring the gospel. And that's very fun. Then we also bring in a lot of speakers who are from talk about chemical dependency and mental illness and prostitution and kids and drugs and gangs and how city politics work, a whole bunch of little pieces of knowledge that will give you, like 2 hours is not going to make you a chemical dependency counselor, but it'll teach you what AA is, some of the different theories on chemical dependency, where do you start, what's an intervention, what's AA, what's Al-Anon, what's Alateen, and how do you go about getting somebody some help. So people find that very, very helpful in ministry all the rest of their lives. So that's a lot of fun, and all of a sudden there's something, now I don't mean this in any occultish way, but there's something magical that starts happening about April, that all of a sudden the class just kind of gels and the vision gels, and it gets very, very exciting. And so that's how this works. It's the second half. You've done all the heavy lifting. You'll be reading 1 book and a few articles in the second semester. We're trying to keep the workload very manageable, and most of what you will be doing and learning will be in the class. So there isn't a lot of homework and so forth. I know, and if you really want some ratings or you want some homework, let me know. I can arrange that. But okay, anyway, good job tonight. Very good job on analyzing these things. And if you've never served on a board, if you've never served in an organization like that, if you've never been on a church council, count yourselves lucky. No. For some people, this is the first time they've started looking at the nuts and bolts and how an organization works, and so that's where we started. Okay, we've still got an awful lot of food over there.
There's got roommates that they want to take them to.
I've got some. I can probably take the cookies up. You guys can take some, stuff a couple cookies in your pocket if you want. I'll take the leftovers up to the staff. They're malnourished. And then there's a lot of other food over here.